Hello, my name is Doug Heaton. I'd like to thank you for being interested enough to be involved in the political process. The fact that you are watching this indicates that you are interested and involved. Political apathy is a great threat to our republic, so thank you. My goal today is that you get to know me well enough to make an informed decision at the convention and at the primary election coming up. I'm going to explain to you why I'm running for office. Benjamin Franklin is quoted as saying, "A frequent recurrence to fundamental principles is absolutely necessary to preserve the blessings of liberty and to keep a government free." I have made a long-time hobby of trying to discover those principles. You find them in the founding documents and in the writings of the founders and other great thinkers like Blackstone and Bastiat and Adam Smith, and especially in the Federalist Papers. I believe the most critical principles, the very foundation of our system, are those principles relating to the origins of authority and the delegation of that authority to people who serve as our elected representatives. And I'm going to try to enumerate what I believe those principles to be. Number one, that the origin of all authority is God, and it comes to men and women in the form of the unalienable rights. In the language of the Declaration of Independence, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Number two, that the purpose of governments is to secure those rights to the people. Again, in the language of the Declaration, that to secure those rights, governments are instituted among men. Number three, that the source of governmental authority is a delegation of power from the people they serve. Number four, that governmental powers are strictly limited to those enumerated in the constitutions. Federal powers by the federal constitution and state powers by the state constitution, and perhaps to some degree by the federal constitution as well. Number five, that the people cannot delegate more power to a government than they themselves possess, which means that an action that would constitute a crime by a person would also constitute a crime if performed by a government. And finally, number six, there is no magical expansion of power when the delegation from the people is made to the government. It's important to understand that when a government goes beyond legitimate delegated powers, when it assumes that it can manufacture authority out of thin air, it crosses a line that is extremely difficult to uncross. And once the line is crossed, there's never a solid place to draw another line. The established pattern of business as usual at our legislatures, both state and federal, is to compromise. Now, I understand the need for compromise in many things, but as relating to these fundamental principles, compromise means abandoning the very source of the freedom and prosperity that has made America the brightest shining spot in all of human history. We should never compromise those basic fundamental principles. History has shown over and over again that once governments cross constitutional boundaries, they continue on a pattern of usurping authority until liberty is no more. Historically, every republic in history has failed because they failed to hold the line on those principles. The bad news is that when we consider where we are as a nation at the state level or even locally, we're beyond the principles that I just enumerated. The good news is that as long as there are free elections, there is an opportunity to recur to the fundamental principles that Benjamin Franklin said we must do. That is assuming that we can educate voters to elect men and women who understand correct principles and have courage enough to hold the line. It is, after all, the voters who ultimately set the course of our politics. Elections truly do have consequences. My reason for running for this office is that I understand the principles, and I believe that the dialogue I will bring to the legislature needs to be at the legislature. For example, when a bill is before the legislature, I believe the people who vote on that bill should ask themselves questions like these. Who am I trying to protect? What am I trying to protect them from? Is this action creating an unlevel playing field? Are we picking winners and losers? Is this action infringing unalienable rights? Would I be willing to send enforcement officers to enforce this law by whatever means is necessary? Because that is what we're asking enforcement to do, is to enforce all of the laws by whatever means is necessary. If the answers to any of these questions makes me feel uncomfortable, perhaps that bill should remain on the list of just good ideas, but not become a law. Heaven knows the last thing we need is just another law. The volume of law now exceeds anyone's ability to know them all. I think nationally, the page count of law is somewhere in the neighborhood of 70,000 pages. And at the state level, it's not much better. It's hard to keep from breaking laws when we can't possibly know what they are. And even the smartest lawyers don't know all of the laws. Another question that needs to be asked at the state and the national level is, does the proposed legislation fit the entire state or nation? Or is it just a good fit for part of it? Legislation is rarely one size fits all. One of my pet peeves is when a citizen goes before his city council or county commission and seeks legislation, but it fails, so he goes to the legislator at the state level or the national level and seeks legislation there, and it passes. And what may or may not have been a good idea at the local level is usually a terrible idea when it's applied across the entire state, especially a state as diverse as Utah is. That kind of legislation should be enacted at the local level or not at all. Not at the state level where it becomes binding on everyone. In this discussion, I like to use an analogy that legislation is the lubricant that decreases the friction between the moving parts. The people are the moving parts. And it takes more lubrication when there are a lot of people who are close together than it does when there are just a few who are not. For example, if you live in Wayne County or Piute County with several million acres and a population of less than 2,000, and if you live in the middle of a several thousand acre ranch, you can probably step out of your front door and responsibly discharge a firearm in any direction. In downtown Salt Lake, that would be a bad idea. Different rules are needed in metropolitan Salt Lake City than in rural Piute County. Additionally, not all good ideas should become law. We should never legislate wisdom. One of my favorite sayings is that stupid is an unalienable right. And I'm serious about that. If we try and eliminate all bad choices, we couldn't build a library big enough to hold all the laws that we would have to create. And all of us would certainly end up breaking a lot of them. Nor should we protect people from themselves. Our job is to protect people from other people. Folks, politically, I am very predictable. I don't test political wins. I'm not afraid to fight for true principles. It's not particularly important to me to be popular. I think I can be persuasive, but I suppose you would need to be the judge of that. I'm trying to be persuasive now, I guess. How am I doing, right? But if elected, this is the kind of conversation I would bring to the Capitol. I think this kind of conversation should be at the Capitol. Now, if you agree, I might be your guy. If you believe that most problems are best handled by government, or that it's government's job to take care of you, or that income redistribution is a good thing, I'm probably not your guy. My name is Doug Heaton. Thank you so much.